He was just the janitor, mop in hand, head down, invisible to the world until one night, when a black belt and a spotless gi insisted on making him the punchline of a joke. "Hey you, how about a quick demonstration?" barked Brandon Cole from the center of the mat, his voice sharp, his ego sharper. His black belt gleamed under the gym's fluorescent lights like a badge of untouchable superiority. The students chuckled nervously, unsure if this was a lesson or a spectacle. "I bet you've never seen a real fight in your life," he added, sneering. "What happened next?" "Silence the entire gym. And if you're here for a feel-good story, this isn't it. This is a story about power, about pride, about a man the world forgot, but who never forgot who he really was." Elijah Moore, the man behind the mop, didn't flinch. He didn't beg, didn't explain. He simply looked up, and in that one glance, something in Brandon's confidence cracked. There was no rage, no threat, just a kind of quiet that warned of a storm long before the thunder ever came. Brandon thought he was calling out a janitor for fun. What he really did was awaken a force that had been dormant for over 2 decades. What he didn't know was that Elijah had once gone by another name, a name that used to echo through the blood-soaked cages of international MMA, a name that every serious fighter once feared: Elijah Phantom Storm Moore. But on that night, in a small martial arts gym in Oak Ridge, California, nobody knew who they were mocking. Nobody knew the ground they were standing on was about to shake. And the most devastating part, it only took one move, one motion, one touch, to dismantle a lifetime of arrogance. What began as a humiliating joke became the most unforgettable lesson Brandon and everyone watching would ever receive. If you believe true strength has nothing to do with belts or titles, if you think humility can hit harder than fists, then stay with us. This story will challenge everything you think you know about respect, power, and identity. And if it does, hit like, subscribe to Black Soul Stories, and tell us in the comments who really taught the lesson that night. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is not destruction, it's dignity. For 20 years, Elijah Moore had walked like a man carrying a storm in his chest, one he refused to let break loose. He had lived in silence, by design, no interviews, no press, no headlines, just odd jobs, quiet towns, and small rooms with doors that locked from the inside. Places where no one asked questions, places where no one looked too closely, places where ghosts could settle into routine. But he hadn't always been invisible. There was a time when his name echoed in arenas packed with 20,000 screaming fans. A time when announcers stretched out the syllables of his ring name like it was holy. Elijah Phantom Storm Moore, 5-time world champion, undefeated, a technician in the cage. A predator with precision, every move surgical, every blow measured, not brute force, pure calculation. They said he didn't fight opponents, he deconstructed them, and then he disappeared. No farewell match, no retirement speech, just gone. Only a handful of people knew why. It had happened on a night that was never supposed to matter. Just a training session, sparring, easy work, but sometimes the smallest cracks are the ones that split mountains. Tony Rivas, Elijah's best friend, training partner, and the only man who could match his timing, was in the ring with him that night. The two had been preparing for an exhibition fight in Tokyo, friendly, promotional, no stakes. Except, stakes are subjective. That day, the crowd at the gym had been bigger than usual, a mix of students, reporters, fans. A few voices from the sidelines had said things they thought couldn't be heard. "They're letting that black kid run the floor again? I give Tim 2 rounds before he gasses out. Can't believe they let these guys in now." At first, Elijah ignored it. He always did. But when you carry a lifetime of being doubted, dismissed, and degraded, sometimes it only takes one more whisper to split the dam. The round began. Just movement, just rhythm, just breath. Until it wasn't. Until something snapped. A combo. Too fast, too hard, too much force behind the final elbow. Tony's guard was up, but the angle was wrong. His feet caught on a sweat-slick mat. He stumbled, fell. His head hit the canvas at the wrong tilt, the wrong time, with the wrong weight. It didn't look like a tragedy. At first, Tony blinked, tried to smile, said he was fine. Then his words slurred. Then he collapsed. Then he never woke up. The investigation ruled it an accident. Everyone did. Everyone except Elijah. Because he knew. He knew it wasn't just physics or chance. It was emotion. It was shame, weaponized. It was all the years of holding back, suddenly not holding back at all. Tony died not because Elijah was out of control in his body, but because, for the first time in his life, he had lost control of his mind. That's when the silence began. He gave up the belt, gave up the cage, walked away from the only world that had ever truly known him, and never looked back. He didn't run from the sport, he ran from himself. From that night on, Elijah Moore became a ghost in plain sight, until Oak Ridge, until Olympus Dojo, until a cocky black belt with something to prove decided to poke a dragon sleeping in Janitor's clothes. But the thing about storms, they don't forget how to rage. And Elijah Moore had never truly stopped being the Phantom. He had just been waiting for a reason, a moment, a line in the sand that would force him to remember what he'd once been and confront what he'd spent 2 decades trying to forget. Brandon Cole couldn't help himself. He smelled blood, or at least he thought he did. Pacing the mat like a lion circling a lamb, he leaned into his performance, voice rising with each taunt. "You sure you're not just afraid, old man? Scared of stepping on a mat that's seen real fighters?" His grin stretched wider than it should have, hungry for laughs that didn't come. "Come on, just one round. I promise I'll go easy. Won't even break a sweat. Or are you afraid of scuffing up your janitor shoes?" A few students chuckled, but the laughs were shallow, uneasy. Something in the room had shifted. The air wasn't light anymore. It had weight, stillness. Brandon didn't notice, but Elijah did. And finally, Elijah moved. It wasn't fast. It wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate, measured, like a boulder deciding it had rolled long enough. His hand let go of the mop handle, letting it fall gently to the floor. The clang of plastic against tile sounded sharper than it should have, like a bell tolling in the distance. He straightened slowly, vertebra by vertebra, his spine aligned with the kind of grace that comes not from habit, but from discipline so deep it had become instinct. Shoulders rolled back, chin lifted, not high, just enough. Enough to meet Brandon's gaze head-on for the first time. His eyes were still, too still. They didn't burn. They didn't glare. They just watched. Brandon took a step back without realizing he had. It was only a half step, but it was enough. Enough for Lena Park to notice. Enough for the quiet kid in the corner to glance sideways. Enough to tilt the balance of the room by just a degree. And in a fight, 1 degree is everything. Elijah stepped forward. His boots made no sound on the mat. His arms hung loose at his sides, not limp, but ready like coiled rope rather than dead weight. His breathing was slow, deep, centered, the kind of breath that comes before something breaks. Still, Brandon kept pushing. "All right then, you want to be dramatic? Let's go. But after this, you're going to scrub your own blood off this floor." Elijah said nothing, didn't blink, didn't flinch. But those watching, those really watching, began to understand that something wasn't right. It was in the way his weight shifted as he walked, too balanced, too fluid, like water in human form. It was in the way his feet found the center of the mat without a sound. In the way he occupied space, not like someone stepping into it, but someone returning to it. And the room knew. They didn't know what they were seeing, but they knew it wasn't normal. This wasn't a janitor being brave. This was something else. This was muscle memory coming back from the grave. This was a man who hadn't stepped on a mat in 2 decades, moving like he'd never left it. Brandon opened his mouth to speak again, but nothing came out. His tongue caught behind his teeth, not from fear, not yet, but from confusion, from the feeling that the game he thought he was playing had somehow changed, and he hadn't noticed when. Lena's eyes darted between the 2 men. She didn't know who Elijah Moore really was, but she could feel it in her gut, the way your body tells you a storm is coming long before the clouds roll in. And somewhere deep in that room, a silence took hold. Not the silence of awkwardness, the silence of awe, of warning. The kind of silence that says, "This is not what we thought it was." And Elijah, he just stood there, breathing, still, waiting. Lena Park had been quiet, watching, calculating. That's what made her such a solid jiu-jitsu student. She paid attention to detail. She noticed angles, shifts in weight, the tension in someone's shoulders before they even knew they were about to move. And tonight, something felt off, deeply off. She didn't know who Elijah Moore really was, but what she did know was that no ordinary janitor moved like that. No ordinary man stood that still, that calm, in the face of a black belt's wrath. And more importantly, no good instructor mocked someone like this, not in front of students, not in a dojo, Sensei Cole, Lena's voice cut through the thick silence like a knife. Clear, steady, strong. Maybe we should get back to training. It's getting late. Brandon turned to her, slow, theatrical. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Lena Park, he said, deliberately using her full name. His tone dipped in condescension. Are you questioning how I run my class? No, she replied, her voice level. I'm questioning why you're humiliating someone who hasn't even said a word to you. That one landed. A few students shifted uncomfortably. Eyes darted between Lena and Brandon, unsure of whose side they were supposed to be on. This wasn't just about a janitor anymore. This was something else, something deeper. Brandon's voice dropped, lower now, controlled, dangerous. If you can't respect my methods, Lena, maybe you're not a good fit for this dojo. There are plenty of places that welcome your kind of attitude. And there it was. The threat, cloaked in tradition. Lena felt her stomach twist. But she didn't back down. My tuition's paid, Sensei. And I believe everyone here deserves a training space built on respect, not ego. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Then something happened. Elijah smiled. Not wide, not loud, just a slow, knowing curve of the lips, like the kind of smile that breaks out at the moment a storm cloud finally cracks. Not because of joy, but because it's time. He had heard every word. And what Lena didn't know was that her courage had just lit the fuse. She reminded him of someone, not in her stance, not in her skill, in her voice, her tone, her refusal to sit down and stay quiet. It echoed someone from his past, his little sister, gone too soon. Another voice that had spoken truth to power, only to be silenced by a world that didn't want to hear it. But Lena had said it, out loud, in front of everyone, and that changed everything. Elijah's body didn't move, but something inside him did. Something that had been locked away for 2 decades. Something that whispered, enough. The students didn't know it yet, but the moment Lena Park spoke up, the fight had already begun. Not on the mat, not with fists, but in principle, in presence, in the reclaiming of something no belt or title could ever define. And for the first time since stepping into Olympus Dojo, Elijah Moore smiled, because now he had a reason. Elijah Moore didn't need to put on a gi. He didn't need gloves or a belt or any of the trappings that made men look like fighters. Because real fighters, the real ones, didn't need to prove who they were. They just had to move. And now, Elijah moved. Not with drama, not with flair, but with that terrifying kind of certainty only seen in nature in apex predators who've learned patience, restraint, and perfect timing. He stepped forward, one foot onto the mat, then the next. The gym floor didn't tremble, but the people watching did. He didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't break his pace. There was no warm-up, no stretching, no flexing. His body didn't need preparation. It remembered everything, every fight, every breath between strikes, every drop of sweat from the world title matches he'd once made look effortless. Every injury, every lesson, every loss that didn't happen because he had made sure they wouldn't. The way he walked, it was too clean, too efficient. Every step perfectly aligned beneath his center of gravity, his shoulders loose but loaded, his spine upright like a steel cable pulled taut. His gaze, not hostile, not aggressive, but deep, old, measured like the eye of a hurricane, quiet but deadly. Brandon Cole tried to stand tall, tried to fill his chest with false confidence, but even he couldn't stop his eyes from scanning Elijah's body, noticing the small things, the wrong things. The way Elijah's weight sat low in his hips, the subtle bend in his knees, the way his hands hung, not clenched, but aware, not defensive, not offensive, just prepared. It wasn't the posture of someone about to fight. It was the posture of someone who had already seen the outcome, and Lena Park saw it too. From the sidelines, she watched Elijah step fully into the ring, and something clicked, not in her mind, in her memory. In the hours she'd spent studying old footage for her sports psychology thesis, grainy video of legends, rare clips of ancient masters who moved differently, not bigger, not faster, just beyond. And that's what Elijah was now, beyond. He didn't look like a warrior, but everything about him moved like one. The soft shift in his feet, the way his chest rose and fell, exact, measured, like he was sinking his lungs to something larger than the room. Lena had studied breathing patterns, reaction time, stance analysis. She had run frame-by-frame breakdowns of champions. But this This didn't feel like a man returning to the mat. It felt like the mat had been waiting for him. No sweat glistened on his forehead. His muscles weren't pumped or tensed. There was no rage, no flexing, no ego, just stillness. Refined, controlled, impossibly calm. A calm that made Brandon twitch. A calm that made one of the younger students take an involuntary step back. A calm that made Lena's skin crawl not out of fear, but out of recognition. She was witnessing something rare, a moment no one in the room fully understood. Not yet, but their bodies felt it, their instincts, the hairs rising on the back of their necks. Elijah Moore wasn't rising to a challenge. He was stepping into alignment, not just with the moment, but with himself. After 20 years of hiding, he was no longer shrinking to fit into spaces too small for his presence. He wasn't returning to who he used to be. He was revealing who he always was. And still, he didn't say a word. Because power like that doesn't speak first. It waits. And as he stood there, planted firmly in the center of Olympus Dojo, every breath he took was a quiet declaration. You have no idea what you just woke up. Brandon Cole had no idea when it happened. One minute, he was the center of the mat, commanding attention, feeding off the tension, playing to the crowd like a man who thought he owned the room. The next, Elijah Moore was moving. Not fast, not flashy, just moving. And Brandon was stepping backward. He didn't choose to. His body just did it. A half step, then another. Just a small shift in weight, a subtle lean, as if trying to reestablish balance, but something primal had already clicked inside him. A warning. Elijah wasn't lunging, he wasn't posturing, he was simply approaching with the calm of someone who knew exactly what he was doing, like a surgeon walking toward the table, already visualizing the first incision. His eyes locked onto Brandon's chest, not his face, not his fists. The kind of gaze that sees structure, not status, weakness, not rank. Brandon threw his shoulders back, trying to reclaim the space. All right, enough of the theatrics. Let's go. His voice was louder now, pitched higher than before, but no one laughed. No one smiled, not even the students who always laughed. They were watching something they couldn't explain. Elijah took another step forward. Still, no stance, no fists raised, just presence. Brandon snapped into his guard, a textbook pose, shoulders squared, weight distributed, fists tight and high. You ready or what? He barked, more to the room than to the man in front of him. And then Elijah spoke, first time in the ring, first word since stepping forward. Your back foot's too flat. Brandon blinked. What? You're too heavy on it. You'll drag on the pivot. And when you throw that right cross you like so much, you're going to telegraph it. Brandon's jaw tightened. Elijah kept going, his tone clinical like a coach, not a challenger. Your shoulders are too tense. That's why your punches come from the chest, not the hips. And your breathing's off. You're holding it, trying to look strong. Brandon's lip curled, but he didn't respond. And you flinch when someone watches your feet. That one hit. It was true. Brandon shifted again, this time consciously, but it looked wrong, hesitant, forced. And now the students noticed. One girl near the wall tilted her head. A guy in the back narrowed his eyes. Lena Park leaned forward, studying the moment with an intensity that bordered on reverence. It wasn't just that Elijah saw the mistakes, it was how he saw them. Instantly, casually, like reading the label on a bottle. Brandon was trying to hide the fact that he was sweating, but it was too late. The dark bloom under his collar was spreading. His hands twitched. Elijah hadn't even raised his arms. He didn't have to. The balance of power had shifted, and everyone in the room felt it. Brandon might still be wearing the black belt, but Elijah, he was the storm moving through the dojo, quiet, certain, unbothered. You fight like someone who's used to being watched, Elijah said, almost gently, but not corrected. Brandon's mouth opened. No words. Don't worry, Elijah added. You're not the first. Now, the shift wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Brandon was reacting. Not leading, not commanding. He was in the middle of his own dojo, with eyes on him, and for the first time, he wasn't the one holding the authority. He was the one being studied, picked apart, exposed. And Elijah? He just kept standing there, breathing, centered, calm, like a man who'd stopped measuring himself against others a long, long time ago. The moment Brandon lunged, he was already too late. It was a textbook jab, fast, clean, the kind that had intimidated rookies for years and earned him respect inside Olympus Dojo. But it never reached its target. Elijah wasn't there. He hadn't dodged. He hadn't blocked. He had simply moved, slipping through space like smoke under a door, effortless, instinctive, terrifyingly precise. Brandon overextended, his foot slid, balance faltered. He tried to recover, but Elijah was already beside him, not in front. No noise, no struggle, just presence. And then, the touch. Not a punch, not a strike, just a palm, flat against Brandon's chest. It looked almost gentle until it landed like thunder. Brandon flew, not stumbled, not tripped, flew. His body lifted off the mat, airborne for a split second that stretched into slow motion. He slammed to the floor nearly 2 meters away, the thud echoing like a gavel inside a courtroom. And then, silence. Not awkward, not stunned, the kind of silence that demands answers. Brandon groaned, breathless, blinking at the ceiling. His pride had landed harder than his body. Every student stood frozen, wide eyes, parted lips. No one laughed, no one dared. Elijah didn't move, didn't posture, didn't advance. He just stood there, arms loose, breathing steady, calm like still water after a storm. He could have been swatting a fly. And then Lena moved. She had stayed quiet, watching, absorbing, waiting for something to click. Now it had. She stepped to her bag, pulled out her phone, and began typing with urgency. The dojo stayed frozen, eyes on Elijah, mind spinning. Lena's voice broke the stillness. "Elijah Moore," she said, reading from the screen. "Also known as Phantom Storm, 5-time world MMA champion, undefeated across 4 weight classes, retired suddenly after the death of his longtime sparring partner, Tony Rivas." Heads turned, breaths caught. Murmurs died before they started. She kept reading. Known for surgical precision, perfect timing, called by analysts one of the most dangerous fighters to ever enter a cage, walked away at his peak and vanished. She looked up. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And now he's here. No one blinked. Some looked around, trying to confirm they weren't dreaming. One student leaned against the wall like his legs couldn't hold him. Another muttered, "No way," barely audible. But Elijah didn't confirm, didn't deny. He just stood there, silent, still, solid. A man who no longer needed introductions because presence had said everything. Brandon, still on the mat, turned his head slowly. The smirk was gone. The disbelief had melted into something colder recognition, the kind that arrives too late to matter, the kind that burns more than the fall. He hadn't picked a fight with a janitor. He had poked a legend with nothing to prove. And now, everyone knew. He lay there longer than he needed to, long enough for the silence to shift from shock to shame. Brandon Cole, once the voice that filled the Olympus dojo with authority, now couldn't seem to find words. His breath was ragged. His eyes were wide. But the thing that had truly collapsed wasn't his body. It was his illusion. The illusion of control, of superiority, of knowing who was worthy and who was not. He slowly pushed himself up to his elbows. No bravado, no defiance. Just a man grappling with the realization that he had been standing on the wrong side of something sacred. "I didn't know," Brandon said, voice hoarse. "I had no idea who you were." Elijah didn't move. His gaze didn't soften. His silence wasn't cold. It was purposeful. Because this wasn't about identity. It never was. "I'm sorry," Brandon continued, eyes lowered now. "To you, to everyone here. I crossed a line I can't uncross." Elijah finally took a step forward. Not threatening, not towering, just present, grounded, solid, and then came his voice low, calm, but carrying the weight of something bigger than anger. "If I weren't Elijah Moore," he said, "if I weren't Phantom Storm, would you still be sorry?" Brandon's head lifted slightly, confusion flickering in his eyes. "If I was just a janitor, just a man mopping your floor," Elijah continued, "would you have still seen me as human?" The words didn't sting like accusations, they burned like truth. Around them, the students stood quiet, heads dropping, guilt creeping in with every breath. Lena stared at the mat, her jaw clenched, emotions knotting in her chest. It wasn't just Brandon, it was all of them. All the times they'd laughed too softly, looked away too quickly, let disrespect pass because it wasn't pointed at them. Elijah didn't wait for an answer. Some questions aren't meant to be answered, they're meant to echo. Brandon's lips parted, but nothing came out. Not because he didn't want to speak, but because there was nothing he could say that wouldn't sound hollow now. Elijah nodded slowly. "That's what I thought. But it wasn't cruel. It wasn't even final. It was honest. And that made it devastating. Brandon lowered his head again, not in defeat, but in something deeper recognition. The moment when a man sees the gap between who he thought he was and who he truly is. And for the first time in the dojo's history, he didn't feel like a teacher. He felt like a student. "I'll change," he said, almost to himself. "I have to." Elijah didn't reply. He didn't need to, because the lesson had already been taught, not through power, not through fists or footwork, but through character, through a silence stronger than any shout, through a presence that didn't demand respect, but revealed why it should have been there from the start. And in that stillness, the dojo changed. Not because someone had fallen, but because someone had finally stood. 3 months later, Olympus Dojo looked the same worn mats, same scent of sweat and wood polish, same golden afternoon light spilling through high windows, but everything had changed. The dojo didn't echo with arrogance anymore. It breathed something quieter now, something earned. In the far corner, a class of intermediate students moved in near perfect sync, their form sharp but patient. At the front of the room stood a man not in a gi, not holding a belt, but holding the room together with nothing but his presence. Elijah Moore. No longer just the janitor, no longer a ghost in the background. He stood tall, posture relaxed, speaking not of punches or pressure points, but of principles, about what it means to hold power and choose not to use it, about discipline that begins when the fight ends, about how the real victories aren't won in the cage, but in the quiet decisions made when no one's watching. They called it the ethics class, but everyone knew what it really was. It was healing. At the back of that same room, Brandon Cole sat cross-legged on the mat, no longer teaching, not yet, just listening, taking notes like the student he had forgotten how to be. The swagger was gone. The smirk vanished. In its place, humility. A quiet commitment to rebuild not just his reputation, but himself. He'd opened a smaller dojo down the street. No ego, no theatrics, just training. Honest work. He didn't advertise. He didn't chase followers. He started every session with the same sentence. Respect is not a belt you earn. It's a mirror you face. The words were borrowed. He didn't pretend otherwise. And then there was Lena, still sharp, still fearless, still asking the hard questions. But now she had something else in her eyes too, a kind of reverence, not for Elijah's past, but for his choice to return, to teach, to rise without needing applause. She'd begun documenting the evolution of the dojo for her thesis on ethical leadership in martial arts. But more than that, she had become Elijah's most dedicated student. Not in technique, but in perspective. "You don't teach us how to fight," she told him one day after class. "You teach us why not to." Elijah had only nodded, his smile quiet and knowing. There were no viral videos now, no dramatic matches, just people becoming better, together. The dojo had become something it was never intended to be, but always needed to be. A place not just to train warriors, but to grow humans. Because in the end, Elijah Moore hadn't returned to reclaim anything. He came back to pass it on. And in doing so, he proved something that no title ever could. Greatness isn't measured by how hard you hit. It's measured by how much you rise after laying everything down. In the end, Elijah Moore didn't fight to prove he was right. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't seek revenge. He simply stood his ground with quiet strength, precise control, and the kind of grace only earned through pain, time, and choice. He didn't knock Brandon Cole down to humiliate him. He did it to remind everyone watching that real power isn't about domination. It's about restraint. And that sometimes the strongest man in the room is the one who doesn't swing first. Because this was never just about a sparring match. It was about judgment, about ego, about what we see when we look at someone in a uniform we think is beneath us. A mop, a jumpsuit, a quiet face in the corner. But Elijah Moore proved what so many forget. You never truly know who you're standing next to until you decide to test them. He taught his greatest lesson not with fists, but with presence. Not with rage, but with principle. And not to destroy, but to wake something up. In Brandon, in Lena, in every student on that mat, and maybe in us. Don't judge someone by the apron they wear or the floor they clean, because sometimes the person you're laughing at is the very one who could teach you the lesson of a lifetime. This wasn't a story about violence. It was about clarity, about character, and the kind of strength that changes a room without needing to say a word. Because true power doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand still long enough for the whole room to fall silent. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you pause, think, or feel something deeper? Share it. Hit like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. What do you think is the biggest lesson here? You never know, someone out there might need to hear it more than you realize.